financial markets in turmoil.
What are the root causes of the financial crisis?
The dollar losing value.
Heading for its biggest loss in nearly 3 decades.
Will Social Security even be there?
I don't know.
Buy or rent?
That's a very good question.
Interest rates.
I'm not so sure.
Where do you put your money?
I don't know.
Welcome to the show that answers your questions. This is Follow the Money Weekly with your host, economist and best-selling author. Here's Jerry Robinson.
Alrighty, friends. Welcome to you all around the world. Welcome to Follow the Money Radio. So grateful to have you along for the ride today. Today we have an interesting podcast. Of course, the topic and the title today, are we heading into another Great Depression? Are we heading towards a depression? It's almost incredible because at the very end of 2019, the American people were living in a time where they believed they were in the greatest economy ever. U.S. corporations had received the largest tax cuts in history, providing them the ability to create a big cushion of support, a nice buffer from all that savings that they had, allowing them to really prepare for any kind of 2 or 3 or 4 month emergency like average individuals have to do. And of course, if an average individual doesn't prepare for a 3 to 6 month financial emergency, and then he finds himself suddenly out of work or suddenly having a health emergency, of course, no corporation is there ready to bail him out. So we would expect the same from our corporations. We would expect that our fine U.S. corporations here in the United States, the big major ones, who had just received the largest tax cuts in recorded history that we know of, and that have been enjoying this greatest economy ever, would be wildly prepared for any kind of uncertainty that may lie ahead. Well, if you believe that myth or fable, you would be wrong. In fact, I'm talking to you now on the 25th of March, Wednesday. Today, we learn a $2 trillion coronavirus bailout bill was approved in Washington. And this new quote-unquote economic stimulus bill provides a check of $1,200 for most adults, $500 for children, and it provides 4 months of unemployment insurance instead of 3. But that's not really the kicker. In addition to providing you a check, which, by the way, Bernie Sanders was planning on that, or was it Andrew Yang who was planning on that? Or maybe it was AOC who was planning on mailing you a check. How socialist can we possibly get in Washington? And then on top of that, we have $130 billion going to hospitals. That makes sense. However, when you find out that many of those are for-profit hospitals who haven't properly prepared, it doesn't make so much sense, especially considering that we have the quote-unquote greatest healthcare system in the world. In addition, state and local governments also need bailouts to the tune of $150 billion, small businesses $350 billion, and large corporations $500 billion. So $2 trillion now has been thrown in the form of stimulus. At least it's being proposed and passed now. Now it's going to await final approval and before we actually see it. Of course, the goal of Washington is to get checks into the hands of big corporations and into the hands of individuals prior to what? Prior to the first, when rent is due and when mortgages are due and when bills typically come due. And so this, of course, has been the response of Washington. And I want to stress something here. We're talking today about, are we heading into a new depression or a Great Depression, as we've heard about in the past, back in the 1930s, after the wake, of course, of the 1929 stock market crash? It may seem like a strange parallel, but when we look at the actual data, it's almost undebatable that we are going to be experiencing not only a recession of immense magnitude, but also potentially a depression. In fact, the St. Louis Federal Reserve Chief James Bullard stated recently that the second quarter GDP figures here in the United States could be down by up to 50%. Also, unemployment rates, which are now spiking higher right now across the country, could reach nearly 30% or even higher. Now, keep in mind, back in the Great Depression era, the highest that unemployment reached was around 25%. So the fact that we could surpass that in a matter of just a couple of months would be simply astonishing. So we have a $2 trillion bailout bill that has been approved. And here's what I want to do before we go any further. By the way, we're going to be joined today by John Rubino. He's an old friend of the show. He runs Dollar Collapse, a website called Dollar Collapse. He's been, warning Americans for a long time, like we have, about the bankruptcy of our nation. We're going to talk to him today about, what does he see? Are we moving into a depression? Because whenever I look at what I see, when I look at the economic data, I feel like I'm standing at the shore and I'm watching this massive tsunami coming at us. It's in slow motion. There's not much we can do. I mean, we can prepare ourselves. But the wipeout that's coming from this coronavirus, the economic impacts are simply incredible. And let's not just think about the economic impacts. Let's also realize that there's a serious health crisis going on right now, despite the fact that some people are wanting to play that down. Here in the United States, we see that we are on track to be the epicenter of the global coronavirus pandemic. In other words, the United States right now is racking up new cases of coronavirus at an incredible rate. And at the rate we're going, we will soon be the number one country where coronavirus cases have spread. And of course, we know that many deaths are going to accompany that figure. So the United States now is moving towards being not only the country that is bailing out its economy in a way that has never seen before in human history, printing money and trying to prevent the inevitable. But on top of that, we also face a public health crisis of the likes which we haven't seen in many, many years. So this is a very dangerous time economically. It's a very dangerous time physically. And so it's no surprise that many people are staying in their homes in this kind of environment. Of course, the media has been running around with their hair on fire. This is good for ratings. And so the coronavirus, even though it is good that they are providing us with information, we do need data, right, on a pandemic. We don't want to put our heads in the sand and not pay attention to data. But whenever it's just breathless reporting that is just almost designed to create and stoke fear, then you have to ask yourself, is this really beneficial? Is this really what we need? So I would say the media's handling of this coronavirus is probably just about as botched as the U.S. government's response, which has undoubtedly going to provide us plenty of lessons for the future. Now, I know that there are many people who view the coronavirus pandemic through the lens of right or left politics. Sadly, we live in a polarized system where the only hope left for humanity now boils down to two parties, a Republican Party and a Democratic Party, right? And one of them is always right at all times, according to many, and the other one is always wrong at all times, according to many. And one wants us to lead us to utopia and peace and prosperity, and the other one wants to lead us to disaster, destruction, pillage, and annihilation. Right? Thus is the state of politics in the year 2020 in America. So we live in a very intellectually dishonest age. We live in a time when media is leveraged and hijacked for purposes unknown, except for the purposes of those powers that be. The propaganda is simply outrageous, the level of propaganda is. And in this environment, it's obvious that Americans don't know who to trust, right? They don't know who to trust. But let me before we go any further, I have to stop and I have to commend the listeners in our audience who have been preparing for such a crisis as this. We talk about our 5 levels of financial freedom right here at Follow the Money. And you can go to followthemoney.com/5 levels. And you can read about the 5 levels of financial freedom. Many years ago, I was in the middle of a city. One of the lessons, by the way, we've learned from this is urbanization carries some consequences, right? And this urbanization story or lesson was something that, I was alerted to years ago. But I used to live in the city of Houston, and I was driving around the city one day, and I just sensed in my heart, time to get out of the city, get out of this urban area. I mean, I was very, very sprawling urban community that I was in. I was living in a nice neighborhood, all of the bells and whistles of living in an urban society. And I felt this draw to go out into the middle of nowhere. Right? This draw to go out and find a property that would be away from major urban centers. And this was back in around 2011. And that's where I'm at today. And so I'm on a piece of property in the middle of America, pretty far from a major city, very far, in fact, from a major metropolitan city, but also, pretty far away from just regular towns as well. And we did this on purpose. We did this to teach our children about where food comes from. Right? Food does not come from grocery stores, despite what most Americans think. Food comes from the ground, and fake food comes from factories. And, we have artificial food here in this country. We have artificial news in this country. We have artificial money in this country. Everything's fake in this country. And so one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to try to get our children to understand that, hey, I understand that this world that you see around you is very, very fake, but we're going to try to teach you some real things, like how food grows. Like we're going to put a seed into the ground and we're going to reap what we sow, right? Trying to teach our children some basics, simple things that seem to be lost upon modern society. And this is why the coronavirus pandemic here in the United States is particularly concerning. Many of you who are not students here at Follow the Money, maybe you're just casual listeners, you don't know that our students were tipped off about this crash. We went to cash well before this crash the vicious part of it took hold. And our students were made aware of this. One of the reasons why we sold was because, in fact, it was one of the very first press conferences I saw with Trump. There was technical reasons, which I won't get into now on the charts, but also just a fundamental reason. I was watching Trump do his dog and pony show on television, trying to calm the American people down. It was one of the very first ones that he did on this coronavirus press conference. Very, very early. It was in February. And I watched his performance, and I was absolutely aghast. I said, oh no, this is very serious. And so we immediately went to cash in our equity positions and remain in cash at this point and are looking for bargains, but I don't know where the bottom is yet. I know there's many people who are much smarter than me. I'm looking at the charts and I'm trying to figure out for my own self, but there's really smart people out there who know the bottom, they know the top, they can call all of that. And I'm sure, for those of you who are looking for that, you'll find somebody who will give you the perfect answer. But from my perspective, I don't know where the bottom is here. And even though the United States government has tried to paper over this problem by printing more money, $6 trillion, $6 trillion, right? We have a national debt of $24 trillion. So now, by default, we just raise that to about 30 trillion, right? Maybe, and it's probably going to be much, 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 much more, right? By the time we get done trying to dig ourselves out of this hole. Are we heading into a Great Depression? I would say the answer is pretty foregone. But I'm trying to make a statement here. I want to go back because I want to commend the listener who has been prepping. We talk about the importance of having 3 to 6 months of liquid savings. That's what most financial advisors would recommend that a responsible individual would have. And what's so amazing, I think, in all of this fallout from the coronavirus pandemic and the economic effects, the financial crisis that has ensued and has been exposed, of course, by the coronavirus, is that businesses, major corporations, like airline companies, it turns out that what's good for you isn't good for them. In other words, you should save 3 months of your income. You should save 6 months of your income. You should be prepared for a financial emergency. You should be able to weather the storm. You shouldn't ask for handouts. You shouldn't expect corporations to bail you out. Got it? You understand how it works? You, the individual, are supposed to have 3 to 6 months of liquid savings, and if you fall on hard times, Bubba, it's just too bad for you. We live in a free market economy, right? That's how it works, isn't it? And anybody who wants free money must be a socialist. Anybody who wants to get a bailout must be a socialist, right? Any individual person out there who wants a bailout, probably a socialist, right? Probably leans towards socialism, correct? Isn't that the way we've been told up until this time? The very last podcast we did, by the way, was talking about the fake debate between capitalism and socialism. Remember that debate? It's gone now, of course, because now, how in the world could the 2020 election be a debate about capitalism versus socialism? Well, we were trying to warn our audience and tell you this is an ignorant debate, right? It's completely ignorant. It's completely uninformed. How in the world can we be told that socialism is different from U.S. capitalism, right? Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? So remember now, you as the individual, you need to save up 3 months or 6 months of liquid savings. And if you fall on hard times, well, it's just too tough. If a man won't work, don't let him eat, right? That's what we hear. That's what we hear from the capitalist system here in the United States, because we're not socialist, right? Now, turn that attention now to corporations, major corporations like airline companies or casinos or hotels. Now, these companies, they're not required to have 3 months or 6 months of liquid savings, apparently, because if they run into a 2-week, 3-week, 4-week, or even a 3-month, let's just say, problem, they literally have no money. The airline companies are begging for a bailout from taxpayers, right? They're begging for a bailout. Why do the individuals think it's okay to bail out these companies when the corporations don't bail out the individuals? Do you understand how this country works? Do you understand who runs this country? The corporations control the country. They control the politicians. They bought the politicians. They own the politicians, right? And they just got your taxpayer money, tremendous amount of your tax. And by the way, those of you dancing around thinking about your $1,200 check, believe me, you're going to pay that back in taxes. Believe me, the tax rate has to go up, right? So much for those cheap taxes, right? So much for those low taxes. Got to fund $6 trillion somehow, don't you? You got to come up with the money somewhere, don't you? Well, maybe the middle-class taxpayer can make up the difference, right? Because we sure aren't going to tax the corporations, are we? Because that would be a terrible idea, because that would be socialism. Incredible nonsense. We are surrounded by nothing but nonsense. It's incredible. By the way, has anybody seen the Tea Party yet? I'm sure the Tea Party is probably just gearing up right now because we do have a national debt that's at all-time highs, right? We do have federal spending that's at all-time highs. We're having corporate bailouts now, right? And there's apparently no debt ceiling anymore, correct? So I would imagine all those grievances that the people back in 2008, 2009, the Tea Party, remember them? Remember them walking around with their 1776 garb, says, we're not going to take it. How dare you spend too much money? You're bankrupting our country. You're bankrupting our grandchildren's future. Remember that? Does anybody remember that? Has anybody seen any of those people anywhere? In fact, by the way, does anybody have any other option for solving this problem besides socialism? How is it that the anti-socialist, pro-capitalist President Trump has no other solution aside from socialism when it really matters? We're told that socialism was going to destroy our country, right? Bernie Sanders wants to give out money to individuals, right? Individuals. They're going to get checks in the mail, right? Remember that? Does anybody realize what's being exposed here in the coronavirus? The isms that people cling to, the false gods of capitalism, the false gods even of socialism, the false gods of just fill in the blank, all the different isms. Do you realize how many of those have just been smashed before our eyes by an invisible enemy? Oh, the irony. I mean, I'm swimming in irony here. It's incredible. It is simply incredible. Now, if it wasn't a 2020, or I should say if it wasn't an election year, we'd probably have people, trying to put public health first. But this isn't a regular year, friends. This is 2020, and this is an election year. Therefore, because it's an election year, things are going to be very, very different, right? Very, very different. So this is very likely, the coronavirus is very likely, of course, leave it to America, to turn this into a red versus blue kind of debate. It's going to turn into another dumb Republican Democrat debate, right? Undoubtedly, this is going to have to go to devolve to that place, right? Well, it's the Democrats' problem. No, it's the Republicans' problem. Okay, this is the end of the empire, friends. This is the end of the empire. This is how it ends. It ends at a moment like this, of sheer insanity, of sheer stupidity. This is how it has ended in the past. Now we got a Fed pumping in money, printing anything. It's called QE Unlimited. They'll print anything. They'll buy anything. They'll buy corporate bonds, short-term municipal bonds, which they already are, mortgage-backed securities, government debt across the yield curve. It does not matter. They'll buy anything. Now, if we learn from the lessons of the past, we would say that's a bad idea, right? That's not a good idea in a situation like this. But notice, it's the only solution. This is what I want to stress to you. After them jawboning, after hearing the White House jawbone about how we are not a socialist country and we're not going to allow any socialists in this country and we're going to stop socialism in its tracks. Literally, the same people who have been saying that and have been preaching that, right, are now saying, the only solution to our current crisis is socialism. I mean, wow. Just incredible irony. Don't miss the irony here. That's what I really want. And where's the free marketers, by the way? Where is the free marketer coming out saying, listen, guys, I know it's tough, but we really shouldn't do bailouts, so we need to let the airlines fail, and we need to let the hotels fail, and we need to let the educational institutions fail, and we need to let the restaurants fail, and we need to let the private jet industry fail, and we need to let individuals fail. Where is he now? He talks big whenever times are quote unquote good, right? Whenever the rich when their house isn't on fire, well, they want rugged individual free market capitalism for the individual, don't they? Aren't they always barking about that? Are they not always barking about that? And now today, all that is quiet. No free marketer in sight. No free market solution whatsoever to a free market problem, right? Just socialism, right? So come on, you know the long con that's going on here, right? You know it's a long con. Wake up. Wake up from the right-left divide. If this show can do anything for you in any way, shape, or form, it will help you wake up from the left-right divide, the political divide. It is nonsense. It's nonsense. I mean, if you want more proof of nonsense, let's just listen to Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who is pro-life. Pro-life. But then he says this. Roll the tape.
Living in fear of is what's happening to this country. And, you know, Tucker, no one reached out to me and said, as a senior citizen, are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren? And if that's the exchange, I'm all in. And that doesn't make me noble or brave or anything like that. I just think there are lots of grandparents out there in this country, like me, I have 6 grandchildren, that what we all care about and what we love more than anything are those children. And I want to, you know, live smart and see through this, but I don't want the whole country to be sacrificed. And that's what I see. I've talked to hundreds of people, Tucker, and just in the last week, and making calls all the time. And everyone says pretty much the same thing, that we can't lose our whole country. We're having an economic collapse. I'm also a small businessman. I understand it. And I talk with business people all the time, Tucker. And my heart is lifted tonight by what I heard the president say, because we can do more than, you know, one thing at a time. We can do 2 things. So, you know, my message is that let's get back to work. Let's get back to living. Let's be smart about it. And those of us who are 70 plus, we'll take care of ourselves, but don't sacrifice the country. Don't do that.
So now that the 15 days to slow the spread campaign started by the White House has utterly failed, and now that we have the United States moving into becoming the epicenter of the entire global corona pandemic, thanks to a lack of testing, a lack of preparedness, a lack of response at the federal level, now the solution is to do what? Well, since we weren't able to stop it, let's just go back to work. Right? Let's just go back to work. So that 15 days, we shut down the economy. We practically almost destroyed it. And now it's time to go back and then face the inevitable outbreak, which we only merely delayed by this 15 days of nonsense. That's basically what we're hearing now, right? So since the 15 days didn't accomplish its goal, now let's go out and create the really big outbreak by going back to work. And if old people have to be sacrificed for the virtues of democracy and capitalism, then let them lay down at the altar and perish. It's simply incredible. And of course, this is an election year. So, of course, people are willing to sacrifice, or someone like this is willing to sacrifice old people. Because, again, there could be a political victory on the other side. When your whole world is consumed by thinking that corporations don't own any of these politicians, and you think that somehow the right or the left is going to save you, I don't even know what to tell you. What do you possibly tell that person? What do you possibly tell the person that thinks that someone in Washington is actually trying to save them, right? That's insane. That's insane. So this is all about 2020. Now, if this wasn't an election year, if this was 2021, 2022, I would imagine that the reaction would be slightly different. right? You can already see, it's so disgusting, but you can see the political maneuvering going on right now because it's an election year. So not only do we have this terrible coronavirus, which we are now probably going to be the epicenter of, we're probably going to see the most cases in the world. And I hesitate to say, but America's particularly unhealthy, aren't they? They take drugs for everything. They eat terribly artificial food. Most of the country is obese. Come on, right? We're a special kind of people in the world, aren't we? And so when this disease kind of ravages across our country, it's probably going to inflict more damage than it does in another country that may have slightly better health than the United States. So I would say that the United States is facing a pretty big crisis here, health-wise. Of course, our hospitals are going to be swarming, but it's an election year, right? So we have to keep that in mind too. We can't let this crisis go to waste. We have to use it for the purposes of the 2020 election. So not only was the 2020 election always going to be grotesque and always going to be ridiculous, but now it's taken to a whole new level because of this, right? And you're going to hear comments being made like this gentleman here. It'll be turned into a right-left divide. It'll be turned into a blue versus red debate. And of course, that's not really the smart way to go, but again, don't tell that to America. So a lot of wild stuff happening undoubtedly around the world and here in the United States. The Fed has unleashed the spigots. They're doing everything they can. Now, fiscal stimulus, the taxpayers are bailing out corporations. And here we are facing what looks like a Great Depression, right? So incredible stuff, incredible year already off to an incredible start. And as I mentioned, bringing on John Rubino today from dollarcollapse.com, and I want him to kind of provide some his insights on what he's seeing on this economic carnage and whether or not he believes that we're heading towards another depression. All that on the other side of this break. Hold tight.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. We're in a lot of trouble. Because you people and 62 million other Americans are listening to me right now. Because less than 3% of you people read books. Because less than 15% of you read newspapers. Because the only truth you know is what you get over this tube. Right now, there is an entire generation that never knew anything that didn't come out of this tube. This tube is the gospel, the ultimate revelation. This tube can make or break presidents, popes, prime ministers. This tube is the most awesome force in the whole godless world. And woe is us if it ever falls into the hands of the wrong people. And when the 12th largest company in the world controls the most awesome propaganda force in the whole godless world, who knows what will be peddled for truth on this network. So you listen to me. Listen to me. Television is not the truth. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So if you want the truth, go to God. Because that's the only place you're ever going to find any real truth. But man, you're never going to get any truth from us. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night, all ages, colors, creeds. We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. You do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
You're listening to Follow the Money Radio with your host, Jerry Robinson. Hey friends, this is Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly. Recently, we have been receiving many emails from our listeners commenting on the great help they're getting from our precious metals expert, Tom Cloud. Gold and silver are excellent hedges against the growing threat of coming U.S. inflation. Who's your gold guy? Make it Tom Cloud. With over 30 years experience with precious metals, Tom will answer all of your questions. Don't buy your gold and silver through some call center and pay inflated prices. Call my good friend Tom Cloud and speak directly with him and get all of your questions answered. For a limited time, Tom is offering free shipping and insurance on every gold and silver purchase made by our listeners. Call 800-247-2812. And when you do, tell him that Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly sent you, and he'll throw in that free shipping and insurance on your entire order. Call your gold guy, Tom Cloud, right now for the very best deals on gold and silver coins. 800-247-2812. That is 800-247-2812. All right, well, joining me on the line today is a returning guest. He is the founder of a very popular website entitled dollarcollapse.com, and he is the author of 5 books on the topic of investing. The latest book is entitled The Money Bubble. His name is John Rubino, and he's a returning guest, a good friend of the show. John, great to have you back on Follow the Money Radio.
Hey, Jerry, great to be back. It's good to talk to you. It's been 3-4 years, I think, since we've talked.
It really has been a long time. And over the last few years, John, we have been living in the greatest economy ever. The economy has been incredible. And we've been seeing stock prices rise. We've seen unemployment levels at historic lows. We've known that we have the best healthcare system in the world has ever seen. And then suddenly, out of the blue, we have the coronavirus that is now bearing down on us. And the big question that I really want to pose to you at the beginning, because both of us have studied this, you have spent a lot of time over the last several years really educating your own audience on this topic. But when we look at the data, when we look at, say, the Federal Reserve chief from St. Louis, James Bullard, we look at his data, he says he's seeing maybe a 50% decrease in Q2 GDP. He's talking about maybe 30% unemployment rate, which would top the Great Depression. John, I feel like I'm standing on the beach and I am watching a tsunami coming to the shore, and it's incredible. Do you think we're heading into a depression? Is there any way out of it? Are the powers that be in Washington, do they have the tools to prevent a depression?
Well, okay, there are 3 or 4 parts to your question, and all of them are important. And the first is the statistics of this. Yes, we are headed for a statistical depression in the sense that the economy is going to shrink dramatically because, everybody's home now. You've got whole sections of the economy that are just over, right? Cruise ships, forget it, airlines, restaurants, and the list goes on and on. If you're a party planner right now, you need another job for the rest of your life, probably.
So true.
And so that part of it is pretty much inevitable. The economy has to shrink dramatically And it will probably take a while for it to come back because, a lot of things that were just taken for granted before are no longer true, such as, the ability to go to a party and not worry, or go to a crowded restaurant. It's going to take a long time before people feel comfortable doing something like that, or going to the Super Bowl. There are just so many things, or political rallies. We're going to be nervous about that kind of thing for years until we get over, the immediacy of this experience. So the economy is changed forever in certain ways, or almost forever. Now, at the same time, we've got the central banks of the world and the central governments of the world just going to town on, fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus. And they're basically, because they're armed with unlimited printing presses, electronic printing presses, they can literally, at the Fed, for instance, type in a number, say $1 trillion, hit send, and then $1 trillion have been created and added to, say, JP Morgan Chase's balance sheet. That's all they have to go through to liquefy the system. So we've got these two titanic forces now. We've got a natural disaster, which has basically shut down half of the global economy. At the same time, we've got effectively unlimited currency printing presses running flat out. Now, anybody who tells you they know what the outcome of those two forces contending out there will be in the short or even intermediate term are just delusional or lying, because nobody knows how this is going to play out. This is brand new. We've never been here before. And so the way that those two forces end up interacting is inherently unpredictable. All we can say, I think, with certainty going forward is that the financial markets will be extremely volatile. You've seen the last couple of weeks in the stock market, right? Where if the Dow Jones Industrial Average has not moved by 1,000 points up or down, it's a boring day. And there's no reason to think that that's going to end, because we're creating just so much currency out there that's going to slosh around. It's got to go somewhere. At the same time, that huge sections of the economy are just shutting down sequentially. The people get laid off, then they have to go on unemployment, and they stop buying stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes on for a while. Who's buying a house in this market, right? Mortgage applications just plunged by one of the biggest numbers ever. I think that was just announced this morning. And who's starting a small business in this kind of environment? Unless you're, some kind of online food delivery service, there isn't a lot of demand for what you're doing out there. So this is inherently unpredictable and inherently volatile, and that's what we have to look forward to. And, it's hard to see how it resolves in a positive way in the short run. I think in the longer term, however, we're still kind of keeping to the sound money script. The gold bug community and the gloom and doomy people in the financial world, of which I have been one for a while, have always said that, we're borrowing so much money, we're creating so much new currency that the amplitude of the booms and busts are getting bigger and bigger. And eventually we're going to have a bust that is so big that it requires the governments of the world to bail out everybody in sight. And in doing so, basically shift the pressure from the real economy to currencies. In other words, they can get away with that kind of thing as long as people continue to view the currencies that they're managing as having some value. But as soon as the currencies start falling, in other words, as soon as you have a currency crisis, it's game over, because that's their only tool. They only have easy money to attack these problems. And eventually a problem was going to be big enough that the amount of easy money that's needed would crater the currencies. And then it's over for the fiat currency, fractional reserve banking, unlimited government spending system that we've built up over the past 40 or so years. This could be that. We could be reaching a point where the bailouts that are going to be necessary to stop us from falling into a prolonged 1930-style deflationary depression, the bailouts are so big, the amount of currency is so huge that it craters the euro and the yen and the dollar, and then it's gone. Then it's over. The system has to cease to exist, and we have to put something else in place. And it could be that time is coming. It could be that this is a big enough crash to lead to the monetary reset that everybody has been predicting for such a long time? If so, it'll end up being a good thing, because the path we were on was so dysfunctional and so potentially disastrous that the sooner we get off it, the better, I think, for the human race.
You're listening to the voice of John Rubino. He is the founder of DollarCollapse.com. He's also an author. He's written several books. John, those are interesting comments, and I'm also thinking now about the fact that when we look at the big global coronavirus curve, we see that some countries are on the backside, or at least appear to be on the backside. We look at China, for example, and we see that they're past their peak, according to their official data and according to the World Health Organization. But then we see other countries like the United States, Japan, and particularly India, which just shut down for 21 days. And we see that they're on the early part of the curve, and so more devastation undoubtedly set for those types of countries. Initially, when I saw this, John, my initial reaction was China looks like the prime mover here at the end. It looks like they have escaped first from the corona curve, and this is really going to empower them or give them an edge as we move further into the 21st century. But whenever I really begin to think about it a little further, I think to myself, well, if India is going to be closed down and if the United States is going to be mired in all of these problems, what good does that really do for China? I mean, if much of the globe is shut down, which China exports to, then China also, even though it's on the backside of the corona curve, it may also be in jeopardy. In fact, there really may not be a safe place in this environment. What would you say to those who are saying, how do I escape this tsunami? What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I flee? Well,
first of all, the idea that China is going to come out of this in good shape ignores the fact, as you said, that they're in a global economy. You know, we had created a system out there that had to work perfectly, where supply lines were multinational and where inventory was just in time and so on. And any part of that breaks down the global economy. And, you know, China created it or defined itself as the manufacturing floor of the world. So if we're not buying their stuff, so their factory workers can show up, but they don't have anything to do. So China is in a depression if we're in a depression, because we're their main customer. They're not going to immediately transition to a consumer-based economy where they're buying their own stuff. That's just not going to happen. So the whole world is in this together, which is the downside of globalization, right? You know, we rise together and we fall together when the global economy is this interconnected. Now, as for where you go to hide, there isn't actually a geographic place that's immune to this stuff. I mean, Switzerland is probably not in bad shape, but Switzerland always kind of comes through these things in decent shape because they're a country of like 8 million people surrounded by mountains, and banking is their only real business. But that's not really a refuge for 7 billion people and their finances, right? So there really isn't any place you can go to get away with this. Although a lot of capital is flowing into the U.S. because the rest of the world perceives the U.S. to be the least risky of a lot of risky options, and that's why the dollar is up and treasury bonds are being bought by everybody in the world. But again, that only works as long as we continue to believe in these fiat currencies, and that day will end at some point. You know, that belief will end because we'll have to create so many new dollars along with euros and yen, et cetera, that we've got that currency crisis out there. So there's no real place to hide geographically. Financially, though, even though this is different in a lot of particulars from the financial crises that have happened before, going all the way back to the Roman Empire, in each one of those cases, gold and silver did really well because those are forms of money that have held their value for literally 3,000 years through wars and natural disasters and financial mismanagement. Gold and silver have always done fine. They've always preserved your purchasing power. And now we're starting to see a lot of capital flow into gold and silver. You're hearing all this stuff about there's no more silver eagles. You just can't get 1 ounce gold coins or silver coins out there unless you're willing to pay twice the spot price for them. And even then, the supply is limited. And the bigger gold and silver dealers out there are also having trouble finding large denomination, heavy bars. And the reason for that is that the people who do have capital, in other words, the 1%, are starting to shift from the stocks and bonds and trophy real estate that they'd invested in up till now, and they're moving towards what they perceive to be safer forms of wealth preservation assets, and gold and silver are among those. So you're seeing shortages and rising prices in the precious metals market right now. And given what we have to do to get out of this depression, there's no reason to think that is just a short-term blip. We've got to create trillions of new dollars, and we've got to dump them into the economy and into the financial system. And those dollars have to go somewhere, right? Are they going to go to Carnival Cruise Lines or Hilton Hotels? Nah, probably not, at least in the short run. So they're going to go to places where they might have a chance of surviving intact for a while. So that means gold and silver, along with a few other categories of real assets. So it was also according to the script. The whole currency reset because of excessive indebtedness thing ends with a gold standard of some sort, where on, say, some Sunday night, the U.S. announces, okay, starting on Monday morning, the dollar is now just a name for 1/10,000th of an ounce of gold. And going forward, dollars and gold will be exchangeable. And in that way, our money supply will be limited to the increase of the global gold supply, which means we are back on a sustainable, sound money standard at the cost of everybody who trusted the government and held a bunch of dollars, seeing their savings cut by 2/3 or so. So that's what we're headed for. And seeing gold and silver basically go into shortage right now is kind of an early indicator that that's coming maybe sooner rather than later.
Gold does seem to be the hedge here, although we did see it fall immediately in the wake of the sell-off. That was very similar to what we saw back in 2008. We had more margin calls and people trying to raise cash. But now that we have the Fed offering something like $4 trillion, they've had 9 or 10 different operations over the last several days. Now that they're doing the unlimited QE, it seems like gold is beginning to wake up, and investors are very clearly seeing that the yellow metal is one of the hedges here. And certainly it's good to see gold playing that role. And I would probably expect it to see gold prices move even higher throughout the year. Do you think $2,000 by the end of the year is unreasonable, maybe even higher?
Well, I've learned never to combine price and a date in any kind of prediction. But I think the general trend, with some probably stomach-churning corrections along the way, is upward for precious metals, just because the general trend baked into the cake now for the global money supply is upward and onward from here. So to the extent that we have to create huge amounts of new currency, you would expect that gold and silver would go up commensurately. In other words, to the inflation that we generate in the currency market will be offset in the precious metals market with higher prices for gold and silver. So yeah, I think over time, gold and silver should just do great relative to the currencies of the world. Remember, we're not changing gold and silver. They're basically what they've always been. But we're changing the way we measure them by depreciating the yardsticks that we use to price gold and silver. In other words, if we make the dollar less valuable, then gold and silver go up in dollar terms because the dollar went down. It's not that gold and silver are changing in any way or becoming something they weren't always. It's just that when they go up, that means the dollar is going down, and the euro and the yen and all the other big currencies. And that's what we should expect to see going forward, just from basic supply and demand 101. If you double the amount of currency in the market, then each individual piece of that currency is probably going to become much less valuable. And so that's what we're going to do. So yeah, gold and silver should be a really good place to hang out for the next few years. Remember the end point and keep that in mind, that there's a currency reset out there. There's some kind of mass devaluation of today's currencies against gold and silver. So you can, let's say $5,000 an ounce as where gold is going to go at some point. So let that be your target and interpret movements in today's gold and silver prices in light of the fact that someday it's going to hit $5,000. And that's when you can think about selling to all the panicked people that are desperate for gold and willing to pay anything for it. But until that time, buy it, put it away. Don't worry about what happens on any given day, but know that your purchasing power is going to be protected over the long and intermediate terms by this dynamic that is really baked into the cake now.
We're in our final moments with John Rubino. John, you had mentioned that China was, or we are, America is one of China's top customers. Additionally, America is one of China's greatest debtors. China is one of our big creditors. And it makes you wonder what our creditors are thinking. Of course, we don't operate in a vacuum here in the United States as debt slaves. I mean, we have the greatest, national debt. It's all-time high, federal spending all-time high, Fed's printing money like it's going out of style, taxpayer-funded corporate bailouts everywhere you look. You would imagine if you're a creditor and you see this kind of fascination with just printing money to fix all your problems, you would say, you might give you pause. I would imagine that the creditor situation here, people willing to lend us money, especially when we see even this morning, John, that we've actually seen yields on treasuries actually turn negative. And in this environment, the creditor, the borrower is a slave to the lender, and the creditor really has power here. Won't that be some part of this reset that you're talking about? The creditor at some point will just stop lending money to the reckless borrower. That at some point has to happen. It could happen this year.
Yeah. When historians write their books about this time, they're going to have a field day with the multi-level stupidity of the U.S. Starting back in 1971, we decided to, when we went off the last vestiges of the gold standard, we decided to export our manufacturing base to China and then borrow money from China to buy the stuff that China was making with the factories that used to be ours. And we wonder why we're in danger now of, our creditors not wanting to lend us any more money. And again, it's hard to tease out what the actual details of all of this is going to be because everybody's going to be so panicked when things really get going. I mean, this is not the worst that we're going to see because we still have the currency crisis out there, even if we get the pandemic under control. And it's not clear that people are going to be thinking completely straight when it happens. Everybody's going to be under so much pressure that, maybe people refuse to lend money to the U.S. going forward, or maybe they'll do some other thing that's, that some other policy that is cooked up by guys under immense pressure sitting around a conference table with hardly any idea of how they got there or what they need to do to fix it. We're going to see crazy stuff come out of the governments of the world. And a lot of it could be aimed at us as individuals. We have to remember that in past financial crises, governments did really extreme things in terms of capital controls where they wouldn't let you move your money around or forcing you to buy certain things or forcing you to use certain kinds of money or instituting price controls and wealth taxes and absolute outright confiscation. All of this stuff is a very real possibility going forward. So it makes it really hard to plan for the future because you just don't know how crazy and in what specific ways your government is going to go crazy. So you respond to, in normal markets, you respond to that kind of uncertainty with diversification, and in extremely unpredictable markets like what are coming, you need extreme diversification. So you need to spread your money around in a lot of different places, all of them premised on the idea that they'll do well in a currency crisis or a hyperinflation or whatever's coming. But geographically and in terms of assets, you need a lot of different things right now to give yourself a high degree of probability that some of them will survive what's coming. So I wish I could be more specific about this stuff, but there really isn't any way to do it. You want to own a lot of gold and silver, but beyond that, it's not completely clear what you need to do.
It's so true. This is an unusual environment we find ourselves in, and who knows where we're going to be by the end of the year. We know it's an election year this year, and so that also complicates things, John. It creates perhaps strange incentives amidst this public health crisis. It distorts things. So that's also concerning as well. But your comment on the spreading out, diversifying, that's right up our alley. I mean, the idea of diversifying your savings, diversifying your income, diversifying your investments, being nimble and prepared, because the rules can change at any time. And boy, have they changed dramatically over the last few weeks. Well, with all that said, I want to bring this interview to a close. I really appreciate you coming on, John. And before we let you go, would you let our folks know how they can get a hold of you, learn more about you and your work?
Sure. I run dollarcollapse.com, which is a website that's updated continuously that covers the stuff we talked about, basically the dark side of the financial world right now. So visit that site. You'll see what's happening in the world, and you can also contact me via that site.
Fantastic. We sure do appreciate your time today, John. Really do appreciate you.
Thanks, Jerry. Great talking to you.
All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed that podcast and that interview with John Rubino. If you have any questions for us, you want to reach out to us, you can always reach out to us through email, info@followthemoney.com, or just simply go to our website, followthemoney.com, and take a look around if you haven't been there before. We have lots of resources for people who are looking for information in this very difficult economic hour. And as always, I'd like to leave you with a final word as we close our program, this time by E.F. Schumacher, when he said, "There are poor societies which have too little, but where is the rich society that says, 'Halt, we have enough'? There is none." And that's just something to think about. Remember, friends, when you want the truth about the global economy, just follow the money. Have a safe and prosperous week, and we'll see you right back here next time. Until then, God bless.
All of the information contained on the Follow the Money podcast is strictly for informational and educational purposes. It should not be construed as specific investment advice. The views and opinions of our guests and sponsors, including Tom Cloud, are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of ftmdaily.com or Robinson Media Group, LLC. Jerry Robinson does hold an insurance license and at times may offer consulting on life insurance and fixed retirement income products. Follow-up, individualized responses to email or phone requests that involve the rendering of personalized investment advice for compensation will not be made absent compliance with state investment advisor registration requirements or an applicable exemption or exclusion and applicable insurance regulations. Past performance is not indicative of future results. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on the podcast. Remember, never do your financial planning through podcast or radio. It's your money. Be wise. Do your due diligence and always consult a trusted financial professional before making any financial decisions.